All right. Hey, everyone, and welcome back to the Deep Dive. We've got a really interesting topic today.
Yeah, looking forward to this one.
It's one that's really, I think, especially crucial if you are prepping for the UPSC, right?
Yeah.
And especially the mains exam.
Absolutely.
We're going to be talking about the Indian power sector, and we're actually going to be looking at some insights from a recent article from The Hindu.
Mm.
And I've got to say, this article is
Mm.
packed. Like, it's got so many little nuggets in there that I think are going to be useful, not just for mains, but, even for prelims, right?
For sure.
So get ready, because we're about to kind of like unravel this puzzle, this power puzzle that is, really, really kind of complex, but so crucial for understanding India's future.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
to kind of just kick things off right away, I want to throw this question out there. Did you know that the states that are generating the most electricity in India aren't necessarily the ones actually using it the most?
It's such a fascinating paradox.
It is, right?
And to make things even more complicated,
Yeah.
the states that are generating all this power often aren't even being compensated fairly for that burden, the environmental burden that they're carrying.
Yeah.
So there's a lot to unpack here.
There is, there is. So let's dive right in, right? Like, let's get into
So
it.
do that.
So, India's obviously been like on this path towards a greener energy future,
Yeah.
right? There's this big push for reducing emissions,
Absolutely.
increasing our renewable energy capacity, and those are all, positive steps.
Definitely positive.
But I think the reality is that thermal power,
Right.
and primarily we're talking about coal here, right?
Yeah.
Still makes up this like huge chunk, over 73% as of 2022, 2023 of India's electricity generation.
It's still the dominant force.
It is.
Yeah.
So it's almost like we're in this weird in-between space, right? Like
Yeah.
we're aspiring for this cleaner future, but we're still so reliant on these old ways.
We're in transition,
Yeah.
for sure.
We are in transition. But I guess the question then becomes, what is that reliance on coal actually costing us, right? Like environmentally speaking, what kind of impact are we seeing?
Yeah, that's the big question, right? And the numbers are actually kind of startling when you look at them. We're talking about over 20,000 kilograms of carbon emissions just from electricity generation.
Oh,
And, the unfortunate part is that this burden, it doesn't fall evenly, It falls disproportionately on the states that are producing all this power.
right.
And the irony is that often the electricity that they're generating is actually benefiting other states.
Yeah, so you have this picture emerging then where certain states are working so hard to generate all this power,
Mhm.
often relying on, these sources that are quite polluting.
Right.
And then they're sending it off to these other states who are reaping all the benefits without necessarily sharing that environmental burden equally. So then the question becomes, what does the data tell us? Like when we actually look at this discrepancy between who's generating the power and who's consuming it, what are we seeing?
Yeah, well, if we look at the Central Electricity Authority data, it actually paints like a very clear picture. If we just focus on non-renewable energy for a second,
Okay.
we see states like Maharashtra, Uttar Pradesh, Gujarat, these are like the top producers.
The big players, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But then if you look at the consumption patterns, you start to see this really fascinating imbalance.
Okay, this is where it gets interesting. So who are the big consumers if those are the big producers?
Well, believe it or not, Gujarat, despite having minimal generation through NTPC, they are actually the biggest importer of electricity.
Wow.
Yeah. And Maharashtra and Haryana, they're also major importers.
Okay.
And then on the flip side, you have states like Uttar Pradesh, Odisha, Chhattisgarh. They're actually generating way more than they're consuming. They're essentially powering other states.
Mm.
So it's not just about who's generating the most. It's about, who's actually using it, who's benefiting from it.
Right. And I think that brings us to this really important point about this imbalance between what we call, the net exporters
Yeah.
and the net importers of electricity.
Yeah, for sure. And if we, bring in some data from Niti Aayog, this is where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
Chhattisgarh, they're actually the leading net exporter,
Okay.
sending out a massive amount of electricity. And then you have other significant exporters like Madhya Pradesh, Himachal Pradesh, Rajasthan, Odisha.
Okay.
But then you look at the importers, and Gujarat, like we said, they top the list, taking in a huge amount.
Mm-hmm.
And then Haryana, Maharashtra, Delhi, Punjab, Tamil Nadu, they're all heavily reliant on imported electricity.
So it seems like it's the industrialized states, right?
Yeah.
The ones with these really kind of booming economies are the ones relying on others to kind of keep their lights on, so to speak.
Yeah.
Which then I think leads to the next question, which is, well, what about the states that are actually bearing the brunt of the environmental cost of all this power generation? The article highlights Tripura and Bihar. They're both very heavily reliant on thermal power, but then they end up actually selling a huge chunk of the electricity they generate to other states.
Right.
So they're dealing with all the pollution.
Yeah.
But they don't even get to fully utilize the power that they're creating.
That's the irony.
And it does raise, I think, some serious questions about fairness and about compensation, right?
Absolutely.
Like, is this really a system that is working the way it should?
Yeah, it does seem like a system that maybe needs a little bit of rethinking.
Definitely.
Especially when we talk about, compensating these states that are producing all this power. For sure, for sure. And, that's actually one of the central points that the article really highlights, is that there's this lack of a proper compensation mechanism for these states. They're bearing this huge environmental burden without really getting that financial recognition.
So, I mean, the question then becomes, why aren't these states being compensated for what they're doing, for these costs that they're carrying? Is it like a regulatory oversight? Like, is there something in the system that's just kind of missing this?
Well, it's a little bit more nuanced than that. So the way that India's regulatory framework is set up right now, the focus when it comes to taxes and duties and things like that is really on the consumption and the sale of electricity, not on the production.
Got it.
So the states that are actually generating the power, they're, dealing with the pollution, they're not getting a fair share of the revenue.
So the system is kind of incentivizing the consumption rather than actually acknowledging where the burden lies in terms of the production.
Exactly.
And then on top of that, the article mentions this directive from the Ministry of Power that kind of complicates things even further, right?
Yeah, that's right. So the Ministry of Power, they issued a directive that actually prohibits states from imposing additional taxes on electricity generation.
Oh, wow.
So it limits their ability to, even try to generate some revenue from the power that they're producing.
So it's like they're stuck.
Yeah.
Right? They can't tax the productions. They can't really benefit from the taxes on consumption.
Yeah.
And yet they're the ones that are stuck with the environmental burden.
Exactly. It's a tricky situation.
It is. It's a real catch-22.
Yes.
So it seems pretty clear then that we need a system that's a little bit more equitable.
Absolutely.
One that actually recognizes what these power-producing states are doing, right? Like their sacrifices and how they're contributing.
Yeah.
But then, what would that even look like? Like, what are some of the solutions that we could put in place?
Well, the article throws out a couple of really interesting potential pathways. One of them is this idea of introducing like a taxation system specifically for thermal power generation.
Okay.
So that way, the states that are actually hosting these power plants could, generate some revenue from it.
Right.
Or another alternative is that the union government, they could collect these taxes and then redistribute them to the states that are being affected.
Okay, so either kind of shifting the tax burden to acknowledge where the problem lies, or creating some kind of system where it's redistributed to share it more fairly.
Right.
Those both seem like steps in the right direction. Yeah. And then the article also talks about the Finance Commission, right, as a potential solution here.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, for our listeners who maybe aren't super familiar with how this all works, the Finance Commission, it's this constitutional body that basically determines how financial resources are shared.
Okay.
Between the union government and the states.
So they're like the referees of the financial game, making sure that everyone gets their fair share of the pie.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And what's really interesting is that the last 3 finance commissions, they've actually already started to factor in, environmental and climate concerns into their fund allocation strategies.
So there's already kind of a precedent for this.
Yeah.
Of thinking about the environment when we make these financial decisions.
Exactly. And what the article is arguing is that the 16th Finance Commission, which is, currently in the works,
right,
they should really take this a step further.
Okay.
And they should actually introduce some kind of, structured compensation mechanism for these power-producing states,
Right.
taking into account, India's commitments on the international stage when it comes to climate change, and of course the actual costs, the environmental costs associated with thermal power generation.
So this would be, I mean, this would be kind of a major step, right,
It's absolutely.
towards recognizing what these states are doing, making sure that they're not penalized for helping to, power the rest of the nation.
Exactly, exactly. It's about, ensuring that their sacrifices aren't kind of overlooked and that their role in India's energy security is really recognized and compensated.
And all of this is like incredibly relevant for UPSC aspirants, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Especially, for the mains exam. Because it's this perfect example of an issue that requires you to have this multidimensional understanding.
Yeah.
Right? You need to think about the technical aspects of power generation, the economic implications, the environmental consequences. Like it all ties together.
Yeah, it's a complex issue with a lot of moving parts.
It is. It is. And
Yeah.
I think, it's not just about understanding the problem. It's about being able to articulate potential solutions as well.
Right, that's key.
Right. Like that's really what I think, sets apart the people who are really going to ace that mains exam is that ability to really analyze these complex issues.
Yeah.
And come up with, well-reasoned solutions.
Absolutely.
So for those of you out there who are, burning the midnight oil, prepping for your exams, this is a gold mine.
Yeah.
Like, take this information and run with it. And remember, this is just a starting point.
Yeah.
The article in the Hindu, which we'll of course link in the show notes,
Yes.
is a fantastic resource to kind of go even deeper.
For sure. Yeah, go check it out.
And don't forget to engage with us, right? Like,
Yeah.
let us know what you think. Share your insights, your questions, all of that in the comments.
Definitely.
Because, we're all in this together. And having that kind of like community discussion really, really helps.
Absolutely.
All right, so welcome back to the deep dive. We've been really kind of like digging into these power dynamics in India, right? And I think it's time now to maybe like zoom out a little bit.
Okay.
Right. Look at the bigger picture.
Mm-hmm.
We've talked about the environmental burden, the economic disparities, but what about like the social and the political kind of implications of all of this?
Yeah, that's a great point. It's often something that gets overlooked,
Yeah.
but it's really crucial for kind of grasping the full scope of the issue.
Absolutely. So, I mean, like, where do we even begin? Like, how does this power imbalance, right? What we've been talking about.
Yeah.
How does that play into, existing social and economic inequalities that already exist within India?
Well, I mean, think about it this way. The states that are, bearing the brunt of the pollution, right, from these thermal power plants, they're often the ones that are already facing, a lot of development challenges.
Right.
Lower per capita incomes, higher poverty rates, limited access to basic services.
Right. They're already struggling in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Exactly. And yet they're the ones who are shouldering this environmental burden for the entire country.
It's like they're being penalized for trying to contribute to the national good.
Yeah, it's kind of a tough pill to swallow for sure.
Yeah. And then I guess the question is like, what does that lead to, right? Like,
Yeah.
is it just kind of like this, unfortunate reality that we have to accept, or does it fuel other things? Like, does it fuel resentment? Does it fuel political tensions between states?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it can definitely contribute to those sorts of dynamics. It becomes not just an energy issue, it becomes a social justice issue.
Right, right.
It's about fairness, it's about equity.
And you mentioned earlier as well, national security, right?
Yeah.
Like, how does India's sort of energy security tie into its overall national security?
Well, it's fundamentally linked, right? Because a reliable and robust power sector, that's essential for economic growth, for industrial development, and even, for military preparedness.
Right.
But if we're kind of overly reliant on, a handful of states for all of our energy needs, it creates vulnerabilities.
Right. Like, what happens if there's a natural disaster, or some kind of political crisis, or even like a terrorist attack in one of these power producing states?
Exactly. The consequences could be really serious. You could have disruptions to the entire grid. It could lead to a national crisis.
Right. So it's not just about keeping the lights on. It's about much more than that.
Yeah, for sure.
So I guess this all brings us back to India's goals, right, of transitioning to a cleaner energy future.
Right.
And it seems like achieving those goals isn't just about, environmental sustainability. It's
Yeah.
also about addressing these social inequities. It's about, bolstering national security.
It's all connected.
It's all connected. So where do we go from here? I mean, we've talked about all these different facets of the problem, right? But what's the solution? Like, is there like a silver bullet here?
I don't think there's a single easy answer, unfortunately.
Yeah.
It's a multifaceted challenge,
Right.
and it requires this, really holistic approach.
Okay.
So, I mean, we need to be thinking about, okay, how do we diversify our energy sources?
Yeah.
How do we make sure that we're not overly reliant on any one state?
Right.
How do we create a system that's fair, that
Yeah.
compensates the states that are, really shouldering this burden?
Right.
These are tough questions, but I think understanding how interconnected all of these issues are is the first step to actually finding solutions that work.
So for our UPSC aspirants out there, right,
Yeah.
who are listening to this and who are trying to, make sense of all of this, what would you say is like the key takeaway here?
I think the biggest takeaway is that there are no simple solutions.
Yeah.
It's about understanding the complexities.
Right.
It's about weighing the trade-offs
Yeah.
and trying to come up with solutions that work on multiple levels.
Right. So it's not just about, memorizing facts and figures.
Right.
It's about actually understanding how these things connect
Yeah.
and being able to articulate, you know, a perspective that shows that you get it.
Yeah, exactly.
And for those of you who want to delve even deeper into all of this, don't forget to check out that article from the Hindu.
Absolutely.
We'll link it in the show notes. It's a fantastic resource.
Yeah, it is.
And we always love to hear from you guys. So share your thoughts, your insights, your questions, all that good stuff down in the comments below.
Absolutely, yeah. Join the discussion.
And that's all for today's deep dive. Until next time, keep those brains buzzing. And remember, the journey to becoming an IAS officer, it's a marathon, not a sprint. Stay curious, stay engaged, and keep diving deep. And if you found this deep dive helpful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment. We really appreciate your support.